I mean, I do have to say though, I think Slater that your performance was the best on Friday. I really do, and I'm not just saying that. I thought it was great. The song you sang was so funny, and I'm going to be honest, took a lot of guts too. Especially because it was one of those where he almost said a curse word and then said shaving cream instead of another sh word, right? So I thought that was funny. Um, and then your answer, like, what superpower would you have? Did you hear what he said? Invisibility, because this is so. What did you say? Embarrassing or something like that. It was great. It really was. And I would have been happy to vote for you, except it's kind of like seniors get special privileges. And when Caden said something about Zoe making him blush, I was just like, oh, that's too sweet. I had to go with him. So no, you did really good.
There were sophomores behind me who were booing Slater. Sophomores. Like he's representing you, you're gonna sit there and boo, not even cheer.
Well, because we're screencasting this, don't say any names, but maybe later we can find out who that is. And definitely not threaten them. Definitely not. Definitely not. I don't know if you remember this or not. Half of you did Carnegie, half of you did Rockefeller. So far, for the most part, the answers have been good, but I just want to go over this quickly. Do you remember what the point of me giving you these letters between Frick and Carnegie was? Like, what was I hoping that you would come away from this with? Yeah, Mo.
What I took away from those letters was like he didn't really care about his employees, like he just cared about himself.
So he did a lot of stuff for his employees, right? He said that to everybody that he was a friend of the unions, and he allowed unions in his factory, which some people didn't, as you'll see today, right? And he gave them libraries, reading rooms that the workers could go into, etc. But when push comes to shove, what's he telling Frick here? Yeah, do what you got to. I support you. I mean, look, ever your partner down here, um, right? And he knows what Frick is going to do. He knows Frick's reputation. He knows what Frick is capable of. And where's Carnegie at during Homestead? Yeah, no,
Oh, was he in Ireland?
close.
Scotland?
Scotland. Now, don't ever call a Scottish person Irish, and don't ever call an Irish person Scottish because they'll get upset. But for us, we're like whatever. They're all McAndrew or McDonald or something like that, right? Anyway, yeah, I mean, this doesn't make him look good, right? I approve of what you do, Frick, and we all know what Frick did. Basically, conducted battle. The gospel of wealth, though, gives a different side of his personality. Gospel means the good news, and it's a Christian term, right? It's spreading the gospel of Jesus, and he's not talking about religious stuff here. He's talking about the good news of what us rich people can do with our money. And Carnegie truly believes that because society has given so much to him, he should give back. And do you remember how much of his wealth he gave away? What percentage? 90%. 90% of his wealth he gave away. That's incredible. Like, who else has ever done that in the history of the world? As far as I know, I can't think of anybody today. Like Jeff Bezos, no. Elon Musk, no. Bill Gates, no. They give a lot back, but not 90%. So in this gospel of wealth, he talks about there's three modes of giving away your money, and two of them happen after you die. Does anybody who did Carnegie remember anything about the first or the second mode? Yeah.
Wasn't one where if you die, it goes to a family member?
Yeah. And that's what most of us would do, right? We would write a will and have the will give our money to our kids. And is there anything wrong with that? Well, Carnegie says, yeah. You have no idea what they're going to do with the money. They could squander it. Instead of, doing something productive with it, like creating jobs, you could, like, I don't know, invent fake fart spray or something like that, right? I mean, like that's not going to help society out, right? It's going to be a waste. You could use all of your money for, just spend it all on gambling or something like that. Don't give it away to your kids because they didn't earn it, and you don't know what they're going to do with it. You'll be dead, right? The second mode, he says, you could let the government, dispose of your wealth. Anybody think that's a good idea? Let the government decide what to do with your wealth. Did you know, by the way, that if you pass away and you don't have a will, the money doesn't go automatically to your kids or to your spouse. It goes to probate court. And probate court decides what to do with that money. And a lot of times your spouse or your kids might get some of it, but the probate court takes a huge chunk, right? So I would strongly recommend having a will. My wife and I got that done a couple years ago, and it was a big relief off of our back, right? No, you don't want the government to do stuff with your money. You don't want the government to administrate your will because, you really don't know where it's going to go there. Might be wasted, right? But what's the thing that remains? What's the best thing to do with your money if you are a rich person? Those of you who did Carnegie, Slater, Mo didn't put her name on it. No, yes, you did. It's right up there. I was wrong. Right? And I actually, right at this moment, I don't, because they're back there. I don't remember who else did Carnegie, but you have your paper, right? So what's the best thing to do with your money?
I think everyone in the room except two of us did Carnegie.
Oh, okay. Well, good. So everybody in the room should be able to tell me, right? Well, to summarize it, give it away while you're alive. Then you'll know where it goes. And you can make sure that it's going to go to the places that's going to have the most impact. Then you know it won't be wasted. That is the duty of the man of wealth or woman of wealth. Live modestly. Don't live extravagantly. And then give your money away to the places. He actually believed, Andrew Carnegie, that he was a force of evolution, like Charles Darwin's evolution, and that he was placed in this moment in history to help advance humanity to the next stage. So we're like a higher level of human. And he said, it's those forces that have given me this money at this time because I know what to do with it better. And what did he do with his money, by the way? He just give paychecks out to people, just like free money out to people, right? No, what did he do with it? Yeah.
He put a lot of his money into libraries.
Libraries, yep. Peyton?
But,
I did? Library?
Library. Yeah. Anyway.
Oh, really? Do you pronounce it strawberry? It's strawberry, right? Just like it's library.
He turned it into like the music hall thing. And
Yep.
Again,
Both of those things are meant to, like, you can be elevated. You go to a music hall and you hear this beautiful symphony music, and it's supposed to elevate your spirit. You go to a library, you're supposed to be able to elevate your mind by educating yourself. Do what he did. Like that's how he made his fortune. He elevated himself up by his own bootstraps, right? So that was him. So we have this version of Carnegie where he's threatening his workers or allowing a person to threaten his workers and actually kill some of his workers. And here we have a guy saying, no, you should give away your money to benefit the public. And then we got this one. And what's this one saying? Yeah. I can have more money to give away if I cut wages. Ooh. Eesh. Right. And you see, like, there's a good side to this, and then there's a bad side to this. So how many of you put that Carnegie was a robber baron? Okay, several of you. Did anybody say he was a captain of industry? Anybody? Okay. And the reasoning behind that was the captainness?
I think his contribution outweighed his negative effects, especially with the steel.
And I didn't even get into all the world peace stuff that he went through, the anti-imperialist stuff that he went to. And I think a lot of modern progressives would like that. Okay. And that's fine. Whichever you picked is fine, as long as you had some kind of reason for it. Now, for Rockefeller, since most of you didn't do Rockefeller, let me just go through this real quick. I started off the Rockefeller set of documents with 3 letters to Rockefeller himself. They were written to him, and they're all asking him for something: money for mortgage, money to buy a farm, raising money, $1,000 for something. And she's kind of appealing to his Baptist principles here. The Lord is in this, and we will win. Can you give me basically $800? It doesn't actually say what the cause is. She just says it's a worthy cause. Oh, her silk business, right? And so what Rockefeller does is he realizes he's getting a lot of these, thousands upon thousands of these letters, and he is taking a lot of time trying to respond to them. And so what he does instead is he establishes a foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, which takes all the letters and tries to sort through them, and he gives away money to people that the foundation believes is worthy of the money, and he gave away a lot of his money. He established hospitals that cured yellow fever. I mean, we're talking about some really important contributions here. But then you read Ida Tarbell, and she basically says that he purposefully put people out of business just so he could get more of the business. And then you get this right here. If you had Rockefeller, does anybody want to explain what is going on in this picture?
It's kind of discouraging Standard Oil companies kind of taking over coming and doing businesses and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it has, that might be the other one. There's the picture of the White House in it where it's kind of reaching out even towards the government.
Right. Yeah. We'll actually look at that one in depth in just a second. But Standard Oil, his company, Rockefeller's company, is a monster, and it's gobbling up the government and other oil companies that like all of its tentacles. Right. Rah. Then this is the one that Emma was talking about. What a funny little government. Now look, we're going to be looking at political cartoons quite a bit in the next month. So I'd kind of like to start practicing this a little bit. And you've started analyzing it, but let me have the Carnegie people look at this now and tell me what do you all, the Carnegie people who did the Carnegie, you didn't see this political cartoon. What does this mean to you now that you're looking at it? How do you analyze this? How do you interpret this cartoon? Yes, Phoenix.
The government is basically just like a plaything for big
Right? You can tell it's Rockefeller, big companies, right? Because here he is, right? They tell you a lot of times who it is. And this is the U.S. Treasury Department. It's literally in the palm of his hand. I like that plaything, right? It's my little toy. And he's saying, the trust giant's point of view, he's saying, what a funny little government. He's inspecting it. This is the thing, the Treasury Department, all of the tax dollars in the country flow through the Treasury Department, and he is just looking at it like it's a little tiny bug. Like, how much power does he have? And here, do you know what, not to bring up any bad feelings, right? But you didn't get to go to D.C. as an 8th grader, right? But do you still know what this is? What is that? That's the Capitol building. That's the U.S. That's Congress. And it's flowing with oil. It's got smokestacks in it. Rockefeller is I don't know. They call him a trust giant here. Now, look, you don't have to believe this point of view. You can have a different point of view, and that's fine. But if you were going to ask me, if you were going to tell me, the person who drew this cartoon, do they think that he's a robber baron or captain of industry? Then what would your answer be? They're thinking he's a robber baron, right? Okay, let's try one more political cartoon, and then we can get to some some notes real quick here. None of you have seen this yet, or at least not in any assignment we've had today. At the bottom it says, after the feast, the working man gets what is left. Just look at both sides of the picture, what's in the middle, look at the details. Point out something you see that you think that can help you understand what this is about. Yeah, Dave.
There's nothing left for him to have, even though he's pushed there, what's left, there's nothing there, so it's pretty much representing how a lot of the rich people, like Chuck Lumpkins, they continue a lot of things from the government for themselves, and the people who are like, with nothing.
But they had something, didn't they?
Oh, the scraps.
You can eat those, can't you? You ever try to gnaw on chicken bones? Might get some grease, like some leftover fatty tissue or something, right? Pro-business or anti-business cartoon? It's definitely anti-business, right? What do you make of their waistlines? Why emphasize that? Yes.
So they have like a surplus of wealth, and there's other people that have close to nothing. It doesn't matter because they're just going to keep consuming.
See, today, like we don't have this quite today like they did back then. Like food today is pretty cheap, right? I can get extra 40 pounds right there without having to spend much money, right? It's called McDonald's, right? And so like I could, and wealthy people can be extremely skinny because they have money to hire a personal trainer or something like that, right? So it's not the same as it was back then. Back then, if you had money, the stereotype was that you were overweight because you had the money to feed yourself. And how do we know that this guy is poor? Two ways. Very skinny. He doesn't have much to eat. He works a lot of calories off during the day with his manual labor. Not a lot of food, right? And then of course the shabby clothes he's wearing versus, look at their nice tuxedos. This represents the wealth in the country. And they're getting the lion's share of it, and he's getting, of the prosperity of the country, he's getting the leftovers, which is really not much to live off of. And you don't have to know this, but this guy right here, for those of you who are watching online, this guy right here is President William McKinley, Republican from Ohio, guarding the door to the rich businessmen. Right. Now, so the drawer of this cartoon, would they say robber baron or captain of industry? Robber baron again, right? And again, I'm not saying that there aren't counter perspectives to this. There are. What I'm really trying to get you to do is see if you can understand the political cartoons. Like, can you interpret them? Because it takes a little bit of, analyzing skill, I guess. You have to look between the lines. Okay, let's get to actual history then. You have not seen from me yet any kind of notes over this stuff. You have seen my student teacher give you some notes on this. You've had some quizzes over this. This is somewhat reviewed, but there's a lot of new things in here too. Here's the most basic thing that we can go over. What is a labor organization? What is a labor union? Can you please put down here, it's a group of workers that band together, strength in numbers. They don't have power. One worker by himself or herself is not very powerful. But when they get together, their strength in numbers can help them achieve better treatment on the job from their bosses. That's a labor organization, that's a union. The goals of most labor unions are very simple. Most labor unions want better hours, which means shorter hours. There was never a labor union that I know of that said we want longer hours. Better wages. Grant, you need a pencil.
No, I already moved the.
Okay, do you have these?
Yeah.
Okay. And safe for word information. There were labor unions that focused only on those three things. The AFL, for example, the American Federation of Labor, they were nicknamed bread and butter unions because they focus on the most basic things. You know, bread and butter, it's the most basic sandwich, the most basic meal you can have, right? Anybody ever eaten a bread and butter sandwich? A couple of you, right? I mean, like, I knew that I was in a working class family when we dressed it up a little bit, and I would take bread and butter and then put a slice of cheese on each, and then put a mayonnaise, and I'd eat that. That was a meal sometimes at our house, right? Like, when you focus on just the bread and butter, just these things, you're just focusing on these things. And the AFL, because of this, was very effective at getting their union better these things. But a lot of labor unions also were interested in bigger, more complex goals, not for our specific labor union, but for nationwide kind of thing. They wanted to reform the American economy. They wanted changes that were wide scale. And because of this, I would argue they weren't as effective a lot of times. There were some successes. I'll give you one here. The Knights of Labor, for example, the Knights of Labor wanted big scale changes like eliminating child labor. Why? Why get rid of child labor? Where do they want the kids to be instead of the factories? They want them to be in public schools, which, by the way, if I remember correctly, like less than half of children went to public schools in the 1880s. It was starting to grow, and so they were like, let's get them in there. But there was also maybe a more selfish reason. Who are you going to pay more? Who are you going to pay less? An adult or a 12-year-old? You're going to pay the 12-year-old less, right? They cost less money. And because they cost less money, it's going to depress wages all over the place. And so if we keep them from being labor competition, then our adult wages can go up. Now, this is the one place where the Knights of Labor were successful. It says 8-hour workday for government employees. Notice it does not say 8-hour workday for factory workers, because that didn't happen. We're talking still they're 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, maybe 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, something like that. But for government employees, in the late 1800s, we got an 8-hour workday because of the Knights of Labor. Big scale, big picture kind of changes. They wanted men and women to be paid the same for the same job. Imagine that. If you did the same job with the same amount of skill, for the same amount of hours, you should be paid the same money. But it makes sense, doesn't it? But that didn't always happen back then. And I would say a lot of people would argue that still doesn't happen in a lot of places today. Now, if you want to be a public school teacher, then there are contracts that say, it doesn't matter what your gender is, as long as you have this many years of experience, you're on this bill. But there are places where that happens. They also wanted to get rid of contract labor for prisoners. Back then, especially if you were in construction or railroads, you could hire prisoners to come from the prison. The prisoners wouldn't get the money, but the prison might, pay a fee, or you might pay them a fee. And of course, that lowers wages too. It's job competition, and so the Knights of Labor want to get rid of that. And basically, out of these four things, they really only got rid of. They only got this one right here, the 8-hour workday. Their slogan was 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what you will. They wanted the person, the worker, to be able to have 8 hours to enjoy life, a third of your life to just do leisure activities, self-improvement and rest, instead of working half your life away in dangerous conditions. And they were also anti-immigration. They didn't want the numbers of immigrants coming into the country that were coming. Now they weren't really successful in this because this was the era of immigration. But why would you imagine that they wanted to keep immigrants out?
For job competition.
So it's another They don't want children laborers, they don't want prison laborers, they don't want immigrant laborers because all of them will work for less money and therefore take jobs from union workers. A lot of these bigger reform movement type-minded people were what we would call socialists. And maybe you've heard people around the country call Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden or Barack Obama socialists. And I don't really think that that's true, but whatever. We can talk about that, the reasons why later. Socialism means government owns key industries. We're not socialists because the government doesn't own key industries here. The government regulates key industries here. For example, Britain has some socialist aspects to it. The country of Great Britain has government-owned television and radio. No one else in Britain owns television or radio except the government. Do you know what that broadcasting system is called? The BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, government owned, right? Here we don't have that. We have all sorts of privately owned businesses, CBS, NBC, CNN, whatever, right? You know what the only government owned radio program is? Anybody listen to NPR? Of course not, right? Nobody cares, right? In BBC, you listen to that in Great Britain. Do you know what the only public owned television corporation is? PBS. You ever watch Sesame Street when you were a kid, right? But that's about it, right? Nobody ever watches PBS for any other reason like that. But in Britain, socialism is the government owns it. And the reason for the government owning it is for, in theory, equality, and they'll redistribute wealth, take from the rich, give to the poor, tax the rich higher, that kind of thing. And a lot of socialists were in labor unions at this time. Now, because there was so many people asking for reform, Congress said okay, and they gave two different pieces of legislation to try to reform big businesses, to try to break up their power. And one of these laws to break up the power of big business was the Interstate Commerce Act, passed in 1887. The Constitution says that the government, Congress, has the right to regulate big business if that big business goes across state lines. It's called interstate commerce. Congress has the power to regulate interstate commerce. And so any businesses that were engaged in interstate commerce could be a target of this if they were doing bad stuff. In this time period, what specific business was the main one going across state lines? Standard Oil was, but we'll talk about that one more next. By definition, this one goes across state lines. Railroads, right? Keep Standard Oil in your mind. Few minutes. Railroads were the main target of this. And so this law created the Interstate Commerce Commission, the ICC, which is supposed to be a government watchdog when a business got too big and too powerful or abused their power. The ICC was supposed to come along and give them fines. Now, this shows you how ineffective in the late 1800s the ICC was in actually busting up the power of these big businesses. Because 16 cases were brought before the Supreme Court where the business said, these regulations are unfair, and 15 out of the 16 times the business won. The Supreme Court sided with big business 15 out of 16 times, so it really didn't break the power of big business. Now, businesses like Standard Oil were targets of the Sherman Antitrust Act. The Sherman Antitrust Act was an anti-monopoly, antitrust law. And if you don't know what a trust is, just wait till tomorrow. I'll try to explain it tomorrow. But this law was ineffective in regulating the power of big business because of the 8 cases brought before the Supreme Court in the late 1800s, 7 of them were ruled in favor of the big business and were not busted up. What the law said was, anything that is an illegal conspiracy against trade should be broken And instead of applying that to businesses, soon unions became the target of the Sherman Antitrust Act. And unions were considered illegal conspiracies against trade when they went on strike, especially. And that was used to put union leaders in jail when they had strikes. So this law didn't really break up businesses; it broke up unions. Now, there's a difference between skilled and unskilled labor. Skilled labor requires education and training. If you are a carpenter or an electrician or a stonemason, it's not like you can be taught to do your job in a day. And therefore, once you become skilled, you're not very easily replaced. An unskilled worker, though, the job they do is pretty easy to replace. You're just tightening bolts on something. You know, it doesn't take long to train you on how to do your job. Which one would you rather have if you were a union leader? Would you rather have skilled or unskilled workers when you're on a strike? Skilled. Now, please get the why here. There's a blank for the why. Please get the why. Why? Because they're harder to replace. The owners are going to want to keep the skilled workers around because they invested all that time in training them. If you have unskilled workers, then your strike's not going to work because they can just hire scabs, take their place. Now, if you would, see where I wrote AFL right here on the board? Can you write AFL next to this skilled part? Because it was the AFL who wanted more skilled laborers. And that was another reason why the AFL was more successful, because they had skilled workers. The Knights of Labor wanted anybody, and that included unskilled workers. So if you want to write Knights of Labor next to unskilled, and that's one reason why they didn't do so well. All right, so miscellaneous items. What goes in this blank? Scab or strike breaker. Oftentimes, a scab was an immigrant. You know how scab, like when you get a scab on your body, it's kind of gross and dirty, right? That's kind of what they were calling these immigrant replacement workers, scabs. So not very kind name to call them. And they were often immigrants because the immigrants would work for less. Private police forces were hired to break up strikes. Do you remember the name of the hired detective agency in the Homestead strike? You should. The Pinkertons. There you go. That was Grant, by the way, if you're listening up there. If you went to a factory and they told you to sign a pledge saying that you'll never join a union, that was called a yellow dog contract. Basically saying, if you ever join a union, we have the right to fire you on that minute. These are not allowed by law today, by the way. A closed shop was a factory where there were no unions allowed, and collective bargaining is what most unions do today. That the collective is the group bargaining, negotiating for their contract, strength in numbers, but that was also used by some unions back then. So now you've heard it from me. We can go on tomorrow to other things. You have a crossword in front of you. And there are some of you in here who can get this crossword done before you leave class. If you get this crossword done before you leave class, you will get 5 bonus points. I'm going to turn on the lights now. If you're listening online, you can get the crossword from me later, but you in here now, if you get this done before you leave, 5 bonus points. And some of you can, especially because I gave you a word bank. So let's see how you do. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.